To the world, Bob Ross was more than just a painter, he was peace on a canvas. With his gentle voice, kind words, and magical brushstrokes, he turned blank landscapes into works of calm and comfort. For millions, he wasn't just an artist, he was therapy. A symbol of kindness in a world growing louder and colder. But behind the soft smile and happy little trees, Bob Ross carried a truth he rarely shared. A truth so personal, it only came to light when it was almost too late. At 52, just before his untimely death, he finally admitted what many had quietly suspected. And it changed how we remember him. Jack Ross was born on October 29, 1942, in Daytona Beach, Florida. His parents were pretty normal, his dad was a builder and his mom worked as a waitress. At a young age, it was clear that Ross was naturally kind and would show it to animals. As a child, he often took in mice, armadillos, snakes, and even alligators that were hurt and took care of them until they got better. Some of these animals even showed up on his show while it was being filmed in his later years. For those who don't know, Ross also had a half-brother named Jim, but he never went into detail about him and only mentioned him briefly. Ross worked as a builder with his father for a while after dropping out of school. This is where he hurt himself and lost a small piece of his left index finger. Luckily, this didn't get in the way of Ross's daily life, and he was able to do normal things like hold a box properly in his later years of work. Ross answered the call to service when he turned 18 and joined the U.S. Air Force. There he was a medical records worker until he worked his way up and became the first sergeant of the Eisen Air Force Base Clinic in Alaska. This area is famous for its stunning scenery that shows how beautiful nature really is, and that beauty is still present today. In this picture, Ross saw mountains and snow for the first time, which became recurring themes in his work. But before all of this, Bob Ross had an accident that changed the course of his life forever. He saw Bill Alexander's TV show by chance. His part-time job as a bartender gave him time to read the magic of oil painting. Alex's show taught Ross about alla prima, a painting style from the 1600s that is similar to wet on wet. As long as the paint isn't completely dry before adding a new layer, the artist can work faster on the board and finish it faster. Alexander showed that he could finish the picture in 30 minutes, which made Ross want to try it himself. It was clear that Ross was tired at this point, both from work and from taking care of his son Steve as a dad by himself. This is why painting has become a safe place for him and a burning desire. Years later, Ross said that seeing Alexander finish the painting so quickly made him almost angry. He said that the older man could do in minutes what took him days to do. Luckily for Ross, he found out that Alexander was holding a teaching seminar just an hour away from his post. He thought this was a good chance to learn more about art and find. Being hired as Alexander's apprentice, Ross was a different person after the class was over. He became completely obsessed with drawing, but he had to be sent to Eielson Air Force Base in Fairbanks, Alaska. That the would-be famous painter studied the wet and wet method so much didn't come as a surprise when he mastered it. He used it to paint gold mining pans with scenes from Alaska. It was a big hit and kept selling well. At some point, the money he made from selling paintings brought in more money than his service pay. Soon, Ross finally quit the army at age 39, having reached the rank of Master Sergeant. And as we already said, Bob Ross is famous for having a soothing voice, which is funny because in the military he had to be tough and mean to train his men. Even though it was hard on everyone, Ross found comfort in drawing, which he started doing during his daily breaks at work. Ross promised never to play the bad guy role again. Speak up again. After he got out of the army, when Ross took an art class at the Anchorage USO Club, his interest in drawing turned into a full-blown love. He found it strange that he didn't agree with his painting teachers, since they were more interested in abstract art. We all know that Ross likes drawing landscapes, which became a recurring theme in his later work. So, he stuck with Alexander's method and got better at what he did. Ross went back to Florida to look at more of Alexander's works now that he was retired. It didn't take him long to get hired by Alexander Magic Art Supplies Company as a traveling salesman and teacher. Everything worked pretty well for a while, especially since Alexander wanted to get more art teachers to help him teach and sell his great art tools. It even came with some unique tools, like Alexander's famous big brushes, a palette knife that he created himself, and magic white, a base paint that every Bill painting starts with. Painting by Alexander Ross left his kid with his second wife so that he could work as one of Alexander's salesmen in Salem, Oregon. His wife agreed to give him a year to work on this project. If it didn't work out, he would go back home. Ross could talk to his customers at this job, and one of them Ross became the famous person he is today in large part because of Annette Kowalski. Annette Kowalski and her husband Walt were sad because their 25-year-old son had died in a car accident. Annette was dead and had no idea what to do for days on end. Unlike Walt, who was very devoted to his wife, she began to feel something again when she learned that Bill Alexander was telling her that there is more to life and that the world is full of wonder. When Walt saw this change for the better, he called Alexander's business and asked if there were any workshops close. Even though it was 1,000 miles away, the couple made the long trip and could go to one of Bob Ross's classes in Clearwater, Florida. Ross's face no longer showed any signs of his time in the service. He had a bob haircut and the carefree attitude of a hippie who loved to paint. Before they had a fight, Bob Ross had always looked up to the older guy as a hero for giving credit where credit is due. In fact, he wrote the following in honor of Bill in his second How To book: "In a time when people say there are no heroes, I feel very lucky to have been inspired and affected by Bill Alexander, a giant in the art world. He has been my mentor and friend and has been so important to everything I have done." But, like all good things, their friendship, which began because they both loved painting and nature, changed when Bob Ross Incorporated was. The Kowalskis asked Ross if he would be willing to teach a few lessons in Washington, D.C. This is where the idea for Ross's own business came from. Ross was happy to take on the job because more work means more money. The Kowalskis even decided to pay him for his work and pay for his stays by letting him stay with them. Letting him stay in their extra room at home. Of course, the couple paid for everything, even the art supplies and other tools. Annette liked Bob right away, and it was during one of their lessons that she told him he could start his own business. She and her husband Walt even helped Ross and his wife with their money so he could start his own business. Even though they have a lot of skills and connections, Bob Ross Incorporated had a hard time in its early years. It's also important for viewers to know that the relationship between the two painters hasn't gotten bad yet. In fact, Alexander was kind enough to boost Ross's influence. One way the older painter helped was by letting Ross film with him for a while. This meant that Alexander and Ross would often share the screen. In one ad, Alexander can be seen passing the brush, which was seen as friendly banter and a joke between them. "Hand over the almighty brush to an almighty man," they said. When Ross and Annette got together, things went badly between them. When WIPB, the local PBS station, was holding a class in Indiana, they got in touch with Covals. Ross jumped at the chance, and even though Alexander had the top spot at the station, Ross's show was more popular and took the spotlight. The pleasure of painting it wasn't long before the show became popular with regular people because of his down-to-earth personality and better screen appeal than Alexander's. It was quickly picked up by other stations, and Ross quickly became one of the most famous people in TV work. Even though it was sad, this is why the two artists got into a fight. A show that makes people feel good and gives them ideas came from something that not many people know about. If you don't think this sounds sad, wait until you hear what happened to Bob Ross Incorporated. In an interview with the New York Times in 1991, Bill Alexander talked about how Ross lied to him and said that even though Alexander came up with the wet and wet method, Ross thought he could do it better. As for Bob Ross Incorporated, Ross began taping his art class in 1982 in a station in Falls Church, Virginia, and by 1983, 60 PBS stations had agreed to air the show. The business did very well. Bob Ross did all of his paintings for free and got paid from art materials, how-to books, and videotapes. This is a lot of work for someone who works under his own name. The first season of The Joy of Painting aired in January 1983 and ended in May 1994. However, it is still shown again and again on channels like Create and even on Hulu. Bob Ross Incorporated grew from a small business to a $1.15 million company that offered classes in his style and method taught by instructors who are certified by Ross. Ross made about 30,000 paintings in his lifetime, but most of them are owned by Bob Ross Incorporated, which is owned by the Kowalski family. This makes his works pretty hard to find. Because Bob Ross was so private, the world was shocked when they learned of his unexpected death on July 4, 1995, from complications of lymphoma. The well-known painter had a number of health problems before this. It was mostly because he smoked a lot. He was only 52 years old, but he already had 7 paintings ready for what was meant to be the 32nd season of The Joy of Painting. Today, Bob Ross's image and likeness are always linked to painting and nature, and the word happiness is often used to describe him. His look is so much a part of pop culture that TV shows, movies, and many other things get their ideas from it. It was even possible to watch 9 days of back-to-back shows of The Joy of Painting on Twitch in October 2015, which would have been the painter's 73rd birthday. Because the event went so well, Twitch decided to show it again every Monday and give some of the money made from the stream to different causes. The next year, Netflix added one of Bob Ross's shows, Beauty is Everywhere, to their library. This brought the painter's life and work to the attention of new viewers and sparked interest in them again. The Kowalskis saw this progress and followed it. It worked out for them in there. Taking the risk of making a YouTube channel just for Bob Ross and getting 1 million followers in just 1 year. Since they are the only ones controlling Ross's image, it's pretty clear that they should take advantage of this chance. In terms of the Kowalskis, after Ross and his wife died, they became the only owners of the business. The rules of the business said that if a partner died, the stock would be split evenly among the partners who were still alive. It turned out that the Kowalskis lived longer than Ross and his second wife, which was good for them because they have always been business-minded. In later years, they even pushed back against Ross's family members who they said were trying to get him to sign over the famous painter's rights to them before he died. Ross was not a man of conflict, and he put his family first. Instead, he left the Kowalskis out of his will and gave his kids the rights to his name, likeness, and property. Steve and Jim, his half-brother from a calming display that gave comfort. The conflict for the rights have become pretty ugly and the Kowalskis were not letting up. They countered that everything Bob Ross did at some stage in his run inside the organization turned into work for hire. Ultimately the ruling favored the Kowalskis and they received the lawsuit. It became one mess after another. However, fortuitously destiny quickly preferred the closing Ross circle of relatives when the Kowalski couple retired. Their daughter Joan took over the company and he or she made numerous adjustments as compared to her ruthless dad and mom. She had become more open approximately the corporation or even let others in on vending the goods outdoor their core commercial enterprise ventures. On top of that she also oversaw a settlement with Steve Ross and Jimmy Cox, Bob Ross's one-half brother, granting them the rights to apply the Ross call and likeness without stepping into hassle. This circulate additionally allowed Steve Ross to begin portray and resume an artwork career once more, a exercise he needed to stop for fear of having a lawsuit. Despite being an icon, Bob Ross is one of the few 9AF3F374C588C9DCDD1F10256FA5 figures who managed to preserve most of his existence below wraps. What we do recognize about his non-public life is that he married 3 times and is a father to 2 youngsters. His first toddler changed into from a person he had a relationship with returned in his more youthful years. His first marriage to Vivian Ridge bore him a son, and this son of his, Robert Stephen Ross, grew up to observe in his footsteps as a painter. Ross's marriage to Ridge ultimately led to divorce. However, his dating with his son was as firm as ever. Steve Ross even appeared in The Joy of Portray more than one time. Now not died of cancer in 1995. Ross's 1/3 and final marriage turned into to Linda Brown in 1995, just 2 months earlier than his dying. Statistics about Bob Ross' non-public lifestyles is pretty scarce, and there are most effective a handful of interviews where we are able to get an idea of the way he changed into as someone as visible in Bob Ross the Glad Painter. Aside from that pretty an awful lot, the whole lot is kept underneath wraps since it falls beneath Bob Ross Inc., making sure that his privacy and intellectual assets are out of the general public. One more thing that many marvel about Bob Ross is The type of faith he practiced, alas, it's one we may in no way completely recognize given how private he changed into. However, what we do recognize is that he brazenly expressed his notion that there's a writer God available responsible for everything round us. Similarly to that, he additionally wrapped up his display with the aid of announcing, "God bless." To his visitors. Ross additionally maintained his take care of animals, taking in injured creatures, with some of them even making cameo appearances in his works. In Joy of Painting, while the COVID-19 pandemic hit, the BBC reran the episodes of The Pleasure of Portray, permitting viewers to enjoy the works and teachings of Bob Ross within the comfort of their personal